Hello and welcome, I'm Ken Gowdy from Sax Comprehensive, and in this video we will look at some tips for the beginner who has just started out or is thinking about playing in the altissimo range. First of all, let me start by saying that if you're playing a melody that only goes up to the higher sharp note, that is, the melody does not go into the altissimo range, then it's best to use the palm keys, and if you have a modern saxophone, to use the higher sharp key. This will allow your fingers to move swiftly between these notes and give you the best fat sound that is in tune. Also, to become familiar with the use of that higher sharp key will help you with those altissimo notes that incorporate that key. So it's best to become familiar with the awkward position of using that key. Though having said that, I do realize that there are many musicians that have never used that key. But in my mind, if there is a key designed for the saxophone for that purpose, you might as well take advantage of it. If you are playing a melody that goes above the higher sharp note, that is, you are moving from the normal range into the altissimo range chromatically, then it's best to use some alternate fingerings for this, as this will give you the best way to maneuver into this range based upon the finger positions for these altissimo notes. We will still use the palm keys for high D and high E flat, but we will use a different fingering for E. This makes use of the front F key. It may take some time to get used to moving from the palm keys to this fingering, but from here it's just a matter of moving one finger to give us the alternate fingering for high F, and again a little movement will give us the two common fingerings for high F sharp. Then from here again we can move smoothly into the first note of the altissimo range, G. So as you can see, there is a fluid movement between these fingerings leading into the altissimo range, which will be more difficult if we use the palm keys throughout. But try them out and get comfortable with these alternate fingerings, and obviously choose which is best to use for the particular piece you are playing. However, you may find that even though the fingering to produce this G is an easy fingering and flows nicely from the F sharp fingerings, it can be difficult to produce as a beginner, and as such, as with all of the other notes in the altissimo range, you should try as many different fingerings for each note as you can. Some of these fingerings that you find online may work better with some makes of saxophones than others, or depending on your mouthpiece setup. So get a tuner and play each fingering and make a note which works best for you. Just because a certain fingering does not work for you, do not easily dismiss it. It could be that somebody else using your saxophone could produce this note. And this is where the problem occurs with those just starting to learn how to play in the altissimo range. It is not like the other registers. There you can just blow and the finger position will determine what note comes out. That is why you can play more or less all of the notes in the normal range of the saxophone on your first day of learning how to play the saxophone. However, when playing in the altissimo range, the fingerings are not as important as the technique that you are using. So once you know which fingerings are in tune and come out best for you, you can use them the most when practicing to get used to the sounds of these notes. But you should also practice the other fingerings, even those that do not work, since with practice you may be able to get them to work. And the more fingerings you have, the better equipped you will be when playing in this range, as you will be able to choose the best fingerings for the combination of notes that you are playing. Bearing in mind that you may have to make some compromises in choosing an awkward fingering to produce a better sound, or an easier fingering for speed but may not sound as good or be in tune. I'll put some links to the places where you can find these finger charts and helpful videos. There are a few things that could happen when you start playing these altissimo fingerings. You may find that with some of the fingerings that the altissimo note comes straight out, it comes out in tune every time, and this is what you want, and these are the most commonly used fingerings. But you may also find that with some of the other fingerings that you have to be careful how you produce the note, because it's very easy to produce some of the other overtones, and so it can become a hit or miss for the beginner as to what note actually comes out. You may also find that you produce the higher overtone or a squeak, and this may be because you're biting down too much on the mouthpiece, or applying too much pressure with your embouchure, and it's quite easy to actually do that when learning how to play altissimo notes. You may also find that when you play these fingerings that the note comes out either flat or sharp, but this might just be the nature of the fingerings. Some fingerings are naturally sharp, some fingerings are naturally flat, but you can actually bring these notes into tune by manipulating your throat or your embouchure, or you can just modify the fingerings. With some fingerings, you can just add some more keys or remove keys, and that will cause the note to become flat or sharp. But for the beginner, one of the main things that you might find happening is that you produce a lower overtone, which sounds something like this. This can be quite frustrating, that every time you want to produce an altissimo note, you get this lower overtone, and it can actually cause you to want to give up trying to learn how to play in the altissimo range. So what are some of the tips that we can use in order to get these notes to come out consistently, especially if you are constantly playing these lower overtones? If you want to get that altissimo G to come out, the first thing that you need to do is make sure you've got a good air support. So do not start off blowing softly or blow low and then increase the air pressure. You want to start off with a good air support. The next thing you could try is to simply open up your throat. What we mean by opening our throat is to mimic the sensation when you yawn, or when you speak in a low voice, or when you sing or whistle a low note. That opens your throat and allows the air to enter the saxophone in a less constricted way. So try and mimic these sensations, open up your throat and try and produce the note. You never know, the note may just pop out. Another thing you could try is to approach it as voicings. Here you're going to raise your tongue as if you are singing or whistling a high note, or as if you are pronouncing the letter E, which raises your tongue in a high position. It's the same kind of technique you use when practicing overtones. If you want to know more about overtones, you can watch my video on it. I will put a link somewhere in the description. So raise your tongue in a high position, try and produce that note and see if it comes out. If it doesn't, try and raise your tongue even higher and see if it comes out. Another thing you could try is to produce this note in the context of a scale. So play the G major scale and end on the altissimo G note. When you play a scale, there is a strong resolution from the 7th note to the 8th note or the root note. And your brain will begin to anticipate what that next note should be, what that root note should be. So when you're playing that scale and you get to that 7th note, your brain will be interpreting, almost hearing what that next note should be. And that might actually help you to get your throat and your tongue in the correct position to actually produce that note. You're going to have to learn this technique because there are some altissimo fingerings that you use for several notes. And you're going to have to be able to produce these different notes using this same altissimo fingering. If you haven't found success with all of those techniques, then as a last resort, what you can do is to move your lower jaw a little forward. That will give you more access to the reed inside your mouth and allow you to reach those higher partials. So keep your embouchure the same, keep your lips in the same position, but just slide your lower jaw a little forward and try and get the note to come out. The reason why I say you should do this as a last resort is because when you're playing the altissimo notes, if you're jumping from the normal range into the altissimo range, then what you're going to be doing is moving your jaw backwards and forwards. And it'll be more efficient if you're able to produce these notes without having to move your jaw. So first try and get these notes without moving your jaw, and if you can't, then you can use this technique. Once you get the notes coming out, then you can refine it and try and get these notes to come out without moving your jaw forward. If you look at artists such as Gerald Albright, who plays in a normal range, then he will quickly jump up into the altissimo range, play 1 or 2 notes in the altissimo range, and then jump back down to the normal range. If you look at his embouchure and his jaw, they don't really move that much. And so if you can actually do it without moving your jaw, it will actually work out in the long term as a good advantage for you. Though having said that, there are lots of musicians, good musicians, that actually move their jaw backwards and forwards all the time. If all these tips have not worked for you, then what you can do is, instead of trying to produce that altissimo G, try and produce the altissimo A. Altissimo A is considered to be one of the easiest notes to produce, in contrast to the altissimo G, which is one of the hardest notes to do. So use all of those techniques discussed previously with the altissimo A fingering. See if you can get the altissimo A to come out with consistency, and then once you can do that, then try and produce the altissimo G. You may find that once you've learned how to do altissimo A and then you go back to altissimo G, you may find it a little easier to do. Some other suggestions that may help is to use a stronger reed. So if you're playing on a 2.5, maybe try a 3. If you're playing on a 2 reed, maybe try 2.5. If you're playing a slightly harder reed, it means you're going to have to blow harder, which means you're going to have a stronger air support, which will help, as I explained at the beginning. Another thing that you can try, there are various musicians that own lots of mouthpieces, and some of them will suggest that some of their mouthpieces are easier to produce altissimo notes on than others. Now, I think this is kind of subjective, because one musician may say a certain mouthpiece is good for altissimo, where another may say not so. But if you own various mouthpieces, you can try different mouthpieces and see if any of them actually help you to get the note out. What you want to do is try and get the notes to come out, learn the technique. Then once you're able to produce these notes and you've got the technique under your belt, then you should be able to produce it with any mouthpiece and any reed. Once you're able to get these altissimo notes to come out, then experiment with your throat position and your embouchure and see if you can get a better quality sound to come out. Some musicians prefer to move the corners of their embouchure closer and firmer in to get a better quality sound. Some musicians prefer to move their jaw slightly forward to produce a better quality altissimo note and to give them more power. But again, I think this is quite subjective. The way you can practice altissimo notes is to play them as a scale, as I said before, and increase the range of your scales. You can play them in arpeggios, so you're jumping between notes. If you know how to play certain good licks, you can transpose them into the altissimo range and play them up there, which will be easier because you know how the lick is supposed to sound. Or if you know how to read music, then online there are lots of transcriptions of artists who regularly play in the altissimo range, and you can learn their songs and try and play those altissimo notes. On my wall I've got some printouts of some popular altissimo fingerings, and next to it I've got a printout of Gerald Albright's Wine Light. And Gerald Albright is an artist who usually plays in the altissimo range. Well, lastly, let me say thank you for watching this video. Hopefully you found it informative and helpful. And if you did, give it a like as usual and share with your friends. And if you're not yet a subscriber, then consider subscribing to this channel. And if you have any tips on playing in the altissimo range and things that have actually helped you, then let us know what it was in the comments. I'd really like to see what tips have actually helped you playing in the altissimo range. And hopefully I shall see you soon in the next video. Take care. Goodbye.